You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo for another edition of this week's Long Island News, the news show that brings you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. And we are very grateful to have back on the show again, Newsday's politics reporter, Scott Eidler. Scott, how are you?
I'm good. I'm tired, but it's great to be here.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. You've been run through the ringer the last couple of days, huh?
Yes, it's been a roller coaster.
And congratulations on your Newsday's coverage and of the election.
Definitely.
You guys did a good job.
Thank you. It's we were in the studio this week doing live coverage for the first time in Newsday Studio 2. It was just a lot of adrenaline. The Red Dot Live TV. We're very excited to have it up and running.
Yeah, and gallons of coffee too, right?
I had iced coffee that night.
Yep, pizza and coffee usually keeps journalists and campaigns fueling through the midnight hours. Yes. But good to see again all that information being put out there. I was following along very closely. I know other people were, so good to see that rolling. And all the coverage from you and the team over there, of course, at Newsday.
Really good.
But we did speak, Scott, obviously going into Election Day, before the voters went to the polls. Now that the Election Day has passed and we're getting those results, a lot of concessions, some not yet. But we're seeing some interesting results in favor of mostly Republicans. So can you tell us, I guess, big picture, what obviously kind of happened, and then we'll get into some of the individual races.
Sure. It feels like a lifetime ago that we spoke, even though it was only last week.
Right. But this is true.
What happened was something that nobody expected. And the key thing to point out is around Tuesday, we were reaching out to the Democratic and Republicans, but looking at the Board of Elections, the Republican turnout was momentous on Tuesday. Yeah. It completely outpaced Democratic turnout on Election Day, and Democrats barely beat Republicans maybe 1,000 or 2,000 votes on early voting. And last year in 2020, they had a massive deficit because Republicans do usually turn out more on Election Day, but Democrats turned out more. So that was concerning for Democrats. On Sunday, when we saw the numbers, it was about 2,000 or so. By Tuesday, Republicans had more than 20,000 more Republicans showed up than Democrats on Election Day. So that was an overwhelming deficit for Democrats to make up. And Todd Kaminsky lost more than 50,000 votes. Laura Curran is down by about 12,000. She hasn't conceded. She's going to wait for the absentees. There's about 20,000 or so out there.
Oh, there are that many. Okay.
Yeah, but she but just in looking at the two races, she definitely had cross appeal because Todd's race was with Ann Donnelly was very lopsided, but if there was this big Republican wave, she came mightily close.
Yeah, and that's something, like you said, I know that usually the numbers break out more in favor of Democrats for absentee ballots, but you need a significant proportion, that might not be in the cards. And maybe we'll see. That's why every vote needs to be counted, of course, is what, her and her campaign are saying. But in addition to those, that disparity in votes between registered Republicans and Democrats, there also, we have to keep in mind, 40,000 or so non-affiliated voters who came out to the polls Election Day, and seeing again how, trying to court their votes really made a difference, and crossover, of course, is always a part of it. But I guess, to that point, with Curran's reelection, I guess, seemingly not going the way that they had expected, what do we expect to see from BOE in terms of results, in terms of when the absentee ballots come back and when they might make announcements on those?
So by law, the ballots have to be postmarked by Election Day, Tuesday, and they will collect them until next Tuesday, the 9th. So we should hear middle of next week on when, they'll pick a day, have monitors, open the ballots. Jay Jacobs, the Democratic state and county chairman, has said he will look at an audit. Of course, he said that's common. You make sure they put the right flash drives into the right machines. Just double check that. But he is going to go through the process. There's about 21,000, we heard the other day, absentees. I believe she had 11 to 12,000 Dems. Republicans were about 5 to 6,000. And then there's about 5,000 independents. So it would be, Democrats weren't feeling overly optimistic about it, but you never know. I mean, how many more are going to just funnel in at the last minute? If people postmark them by Tuesday, I'd imagine we would know by the end of the day today.
Right.
I don't think more would be trickling in.
Is there any history to gauge that by? Has that happened before, and has it ever turned an election around?
Well, last year in the presidential election, of course, but there were a lot fewer this year. There was an automatic absentee. There was no excuse voting this year. So that's going to be, the margins aren't as overwhelming as they were in last year, which, if you recall, a number of state senators, Tom Suozzi was trailing on election night, but there was a lot of confidence. There's two legislative districts in Nassau, Josh Lafazan's seat and Arnie Drucker seat, bordering each other in Plainview, Syosset area.
Very close.
Possibility that, based on the number of absentees, that they could overcome the deficit. But again, there's not a lot of confidence coming from the current in the Democratic Party.
Right.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And like I said, there isn't a big kind of data set, and knowing that the pandemic maybe wasn't as prevalent of an issue in voters' minds that kept them from coming out in person on election day as it was last year. It doesn't, kind of really bode well in their favor. But nonetheless, like I said, it certainly has been seen as a surprise. And as we, had mentioned here, it looks like the council member currently of town of Hempstead, Bruce Blakeman, he's already announced his transition plans, like you said, and obviously the current campaign has said that they're going to wait till every vote is counted. But certainly, we see these trends, and they weren't just here in Nassau, but also in Suffolk, and I guess, somewhat across the country. So I guess what maybe can be said about that element of it too, Scott?
Sure. Well, one interesting aspect on Long Island is that, in Nassau County, nobody expected there to be a DA's race on the ballot. That was never supposed to happen. Madeline Singas, of course, resigned from her position after she won an appointment to the State Court of Appeals by the State Senate, and former Governor Cuomo appointed her. So that had political insiders pretty stunned about that. And then what happened was Todd Kaminsky put his hat in the ring, and he was a shoo-in. Everyone assumed that he had all this money. He was very popular, won very big races, and nobody thought he could lose. And the Republicans, to their credit, they sent tons of mail pieces putting him on the defensive about state bail reform, whether it was fair or not. But he did cast a vote for the state budget, which included the state bail reform package. He did lobby for aggressive changes, giving judges discretion. But they were quick to paint him as the author of the law, and he's disputed that. But that brought in a different element into this race, some might argue. Congressman Peter King spoke to us. He said that might have generated a lot of interest among Republicans, whereas there might not have been a lot of interest in the county executive's race, and I mean base interest. So that potentially played a role. And of course, it spilled over into Suffolk. Tim Sinney did not have the conservative line against Ray Tierney, and he had the Republican and conservative lines. So that was a tremendous deal over there. So that brought out a lot of base. I mean, you're hearing about, and also with a lot of these elections, it's generally the case that the county executive winner is the opposite party of the president. So a lot of people are speculating about the gas prices and the inflation and the supply chain mess. And there's potentially a lot of anxiety about the spending coming from the Democratic side. And is there dysfunction in Washington? They can't get an infrastructure bill passed. There is this focus on the social spending programs that perhaps Long Islanders disagree with. But of course, Laura Curran campaigned to the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Attracted moderates, but the other thing that you might hear is, well, she broke with a lot of folks in minority communities. Mm-hmm. What was the turnout there, especially with police reform? She stuck by Commissioner Ryder after he had made some comments about why there wasn't there enough diversity in the police department.
Folks coming from broken homes. Mm-hmm.
So we're going to have to take a deep dive into the minority communities and if they showed up. Of course, there were issues with Laura Gillen 2 years ago with lethargy among Democrats, didn't really show up for her. And it seems to have been the trend again that Democrats, either they took things for granted. Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot, wasn't in office in an off election year. So we don't know if this is a bellwether for the midterms next year.
Yeah, that's I know something that certainly is being watched closely. You know, folks saying that a lot of times the governor winds up winning Nassau County. So I know that's going to be looked at pretty much, in terms of, the party and stuff like that. But let's talk about then, how was voter turnout compared to those off years? That's one question. And then I guess, we'll go back to this idea of, bail reform being this kind of banner wedge issue, because despite all the discussion about it, the police commissioner himself has told us, the county executive and others acknowledge that, crime rates aren't really all that higher than kind of, where they've been. And I know it gets rated the safest kind of county of its size, kind of year by year, it seems. So I guess first, the voter turnout overall, and then, how much maybe was that change, if any, from, like you said, this bill reform discussion?
Well, yeah, the turnout was a lot less than last year. And the interesting thing with bail reform is that it didn't quite have the big. It took out potentially one state senator from Long Island, Monica Martinez, last year, but it didn't end up taking out Jim Gorin and Kevin Thomas, which was expected last year. So they ended up overcoming the absentees. That doesn't seem to be the case this year, and that's very surprising.
Yeah, it certainly is. But like you said, that's I think really one of the things seeing in postmortem, how much versus those off cycles, really it was turned up and ratcheted between that. Yeah. I know people talk about the ballot measures, which the Conservative Party and the Republicans very much campaigned against, directly because they knew that it, could impact their chances through redistricting and stuff like that. Right. Versus the Democrats, where Jay Jacobs has admitted, the Democratic and county party chairman, that they really didn't put much effort into that. So I guess is that another element of what's being discussed there?
It could be. 4 years ago, if you recall, Laura Curran was on the ballot, and also the Constitutional Convention was on the ballot. So that motivated Democrats and members of unions to come out strongly to vote against it, because they didn't want the state Constitutional Convention to, rewrite laws for pensions and benefits. So there was a lot of Pandora's box there. So that brought a lot of Democrats to the polls. And of course, it was the first election after Donald Trump. So Democrats in her team had acknowledged that was a key, those were key conditions that brought her to office. And also the corruption issue in Nassau County. Ed Mangano had been arrested. His trial took up the news for the next 2 years, but it's 4 years later. He hasn't been sentenced yet, but the issue has largely receded from not that voters don't care about corruption, but the news of the Mangano and the Venditto trials.
It's not in the news cycle anymore. Yeah.
So you didn't hear anything about Laura Curran campaigning against corruption. All you heard her say was a big part of the message was Nassau is the safest community. And it's not clear that was an effective campaign strategy. Right. Also, she did issue the $375 checks, but you didn't hear her talk much about that toward the latter part of the campaign, too. And folks were not crazy about a lot of the spending.
Yeah, I think the reassessment, I think, was the big thing on everyone's mind. They want lower taxes, and she didn't talk about that at all. And that's kind of a big boondoggle, I mean, Blakeman theoretically won by by saying he was going to figure all that out. You know, he's going to make that better.
Yeah, and we're pushing him for specifics, and he's never really articulated specifics about that.
No,
and
he's intimated that he's going to tweak it.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
From some quarters, I've heard that when you do a reassessment, the only way he can change it is to do another reassessment. He can't tweak the existing one. And I think a lot of people are under the impression that he can flip some switch someplace, and all of a sudden the percentages will be different.
Yeah, and again, we know that people were angry with Laura Kern about the reassessment, but it was backed up by experts. It did bring accuracy and fairness to the roll after a decade of it being frozen. They stopped giving out automatic reductions. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But it's unclear if she suffered from the reassessment at the polls because she did a lot better. I'm only looking at it from the Republican wave, and she did a lot better than Todd Kaminsky, who did not have that issue, but he did have the bail reform issue could more easily be.
And I understand with Todd Kaminsky, I've read someplace he actually voted against it the first time. He didn't author the bill, and he voted against it, I think, the first time that it came up. And
maybe a different version. It
was because of I believe that the judges had no discretion in the first the way that the bill was worded the first time.
We just know that he voted for the state budget, which included the package, and he was on a panel that did send it to the full. He was on a committee. He was on a committee that it wasn't a vote, but he was in a working group, and he did help to author the changes with the judge's discretion.
Right.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, his campaign has said he was speaking out against it, but Republicans have floated clips of Republicans thanking him for his Democrats thanking him for his contributions to the bill. So things have gotten taken out of context.
We take the soundbite. We don't have to read the whole story. We just take the soundbite and run with it.
Right. Yeah. But he did vote for it, and he did also author reforms. But on Long Island, I was at a press conference 2 years ago when the whole GOP caucus got together and just congestion pricing and bail reform, and this is going to be terrible for Long Island. And they started. That was the seeds of their comeback in that press conference. And and even Jay Jacobs was saying bail reform, it's got to be scaled back, and this is a problem. And but he does not regret putting Todd on the ticket. I had asked him that, and he said, he was immensely qualified, and I didn't see it coming. I didn't see the bail reform issue. A lot of people didn't see it being a motivating factor, but the other key thing is Democrats didn't come out.
Right. Yeah, well, I think that's key.
Why didn't they come out?
The amazing thing is the dichotomy, though, is that, here's Republicans saying that, the bail reform is criminals are running rampant in the streets. And then you got the Democrats saying we're the safest county in the country. Yeah. It's
And meanwhile, during primaries and like I said, in the previous cycle, Democrats were trying to, boast their progressive bona fides. But now, in the general election, they wanted to run away as far as possible from it.
Exactly.
So, it certainly, is something that is going to be considered further. But let's go on to, I guess, in the sense of those folks who did win. We know that they both have a pretty long, kind of track records. One being Ann Donnelly internally in the DA's office, but the council member Blakeman, been a long part of, like we said, Long Island politics and even the city's politics, running as mayor at one point. But, let's talk about them taking over at the helm if that is what happens. What can we sort of expect in some sense? I know they've just had these press conferences about what their priorities are, I guess. What are you hearing?
Yeah, well, we'll have an interview, with Mr. Blakeman published soon. They're both basically... Well, they're very different offices. We're trying to find out with the Republicans, what are they going to do to fix the reassessment? Was it just talk? Will they actually be able to lower taxes? Because the county tax is a small portion of the overall tax bill.
Right.
And and will they work with Democrats? And Bruce Blakeman and I spoke to Rich Nicolello. They say they will hold hearings, as they did a lot of hearings into the current administration. They won't just be a rubber stamp. I asked them about that. For Blakeman, he's been around for Republican and Democratic county executives and things like that. So, but if the Republicans grab a supermajority of the county legislature, they have the county executive's office, they have the Comptroller's office, they have the DA's office. That's a pretty big, overwhelming control of county government. And it's interesting. In the past, we've had the DA's office being run by a Democrat, investigating things in the Mangano administration. Right. We've had the Comptroller's office and the county executive's office in the last term be Democrats, but the Republicans controlling the legislature. So there was a watchdog element too. Will there be a watchdog? We have the only office that's really nonpartisan right now is the Office of Inspector General, who is hired at the discretion of the county legislature. Oh, so this is something to be aware of, that there's when there's one party rule, there could be a lot of Republican legislation that goes through, no log jams, but will there be a watchdog and
accountability?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or is it just going to be a couple of Democratic legislators on the day, banging that bit?
That's the same thing that people, Republicans, will say they're concerned about in New York City. The fact that there aren't again really many Republicans in competitive races. It's mostly just Democratic controlled. So it's interesting to see how that's kind of flipped.
Sure.
And I know out in Suffolk County too, they had lost control, the Democrats of the legislature there, and that seems even more, I think, disproportionate in terms of the now kind of, I guess, amount of Democratic to Republican legislators out there. So it definitely, like I said, those ideas of checks and balances and having someone, to watch from the other side of the aisle, even if just, without that much power, it's something that you would think voters would be interested in to an extent. But they did very well. Clearly, the Republican Party, and that's what seems to be what's going to happen here. But for the DA, I guess then, like I said, it is a different office. It doesn't have the same kind of level of different departments under its purview. It's really focused on kind of law enforcement and dealing with the kind of litigation side from the prosecutor's role, I guess. What do we know? Again, she's been there for a long time under multiple administrations. I know she talked about obviously public safety in her press conference, but also about trying to prosecute hate crimes and some other things like that. So what else is she talking about, I guess, bringing to the office that she's familiar with?
She oversaw public corruption for a bit, the Rackets Bureau. So they've talked a little bit about. She's talked a bit about beefing up, technology crimes, and so. But at the Wednesday press conference, she didn't go too much into her plans. The acting DA congratulated her, said she knows the office very well. We look forward to an orderly transition. She's been there 32 years, so she'll have some ease there. It's Todd Kaminsky kept saying she wasn't the choice of Madeline Singas or Kathleen Rice to replace her. She was with the Republicans, but she's survived many years in that office, and it'll be interesting. I don't know the internal politics inside the DA's office.
Right. I was going to ask you because we interviewed Madeline Singas before she became a judge, and one of the things that we learned, there were so many programs that the DA's office was involved in, as far as community outreach and some of the wild things we do that I really had no idea the DA's office would be interested in that. Now, the question is, when it changes hands from Democrats to Republicans, do those programs, stay running, or can the whole thing be reorganized?
I don't think that you'll see a major restructuring of the whole office. Might be some changes in, the top positions, big salary jobs. I don't know how much patronage is in that office. There's a lot in the county executive's office, the comptroller's office, a lot of high-paying jobs that will get distributed. You'll see a lot of people leave. Laura Curran did not keep on.
Right.
or 100 of Mangano's folks, and those people all walked out with a couple $1 million total in severance payouts. So you'll see the Democrats
take the money and run.
Severance payouts. A lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and there aren't a lot of Democratic jobs open for them to go to. The town of North Hempstead might go to Republican hands.
Right.
Legislative staff is going to get shrunken. Will shrink.
Yeah.
So DA's office in Suffolk, it's going to be a big scramble in the government side for Democrats to find jobs.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what's the other interesting thing is, and I think it's a really, for me, it was a good illustration, was, again, Laura Curran was giving the $345 to every family, and
$375.
$375, okay. And I mean, either number, it really didn't mean a lot to each household. When they looked at it, so this is what you mean by lowering taxes? I mean, this is maybe a good dinner out at a Class A restaurant for 5 people. And that, and there you go.
Well, Blakeman doubled down on that.
Here's my point, though.
He felt that. Yeah.
That $345 for every family $375 to every family amounted to $100 million.
From federal
when you
money.
when you're going to tell me that you're going to lower taxes appreciably, not $300, not $400, I'm talking a percentage. Really lower my taxes to make my life better. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. It's not chump change. And the other thing with, so now Republicans are in there, they're still going to have to wrestle with NIFA. Every time they do something, I've thought of that. We pay the legislature to vote, and they do, and then 3 guys come in and look at everything they've done and say, "Well, it's either good or it's not good, and we'll decide." And it's kind of crazy. I mean, I guess it has to be done. Nassau has not been, what could you say, a fiduciary agent for,
Yeah, no, I mean, there was talk if Laura won, maybe NIFA would get them out of the control period and things like that. But
I don't see that happening.
They might. A lot of people criticize NIFA for being soft on Curran at the behest of a Democratic governor. But
interesting.
Democrats might need NIFA now to be aggressive, and they refinance. They'll be around for a while. So,
right. Well, as far as your oversight goes, though, there's part of it, and I don't know what is NIFA's leaning. Are they Democratic? Are they Republican? Or are they?
Well, they're appointed by the governor, who's a Democrat, and members of the state legislature and the Comptroller, who are all Democrats, and they were formed when the Republicans, when Tom Gallo was county executive, and a lot of the finances went down the drain. So
right,
yeah, and I know you had mentioned that the race for town of North Hempstead supervisor still is pretty close and seems to be, tending towards the Republican for that open seat over there. And the other seats, very easily went to the incumbent Republicans, Joe Saladino and Don Clavin. And I know, Don Clavin had some other, kind of criticisms laid at him regarding spending of Long Island CARES, or actually not Long Island CARES, the federal money from the CARES Act and stuff like that. But I guess back to the town of North Hempstead, that seemed to be a large surprise, I guess. And what are you hearing about that race, if anything, in terms of, it still being undecided? There hasn't been a concession, correct?
We haven't heard that. Our reporters are trying to get clarity on that. But what's interesting is that Judy Bosworth was the town supervisor for the last 8 years, and John Kamen 10 years before that, and May Newberger almost as long. 1989 was the last time there was a Republican town supervisor in the town of North Hempstead. So this would be a pretty momentous change. I've written in the past about how North Hempstead, Great Neck in particular, was becoming more Republican, more conservative. So this is something that had been potentially forecast for a number of years, and Judy was very popular. So was Wayne Wink, the town clerk, but she wasn't at the top of the ticket. It's unknown what difference that would have made, but she was looking to retire.
Yeah, but what is known, and it seems that the one who's likely to win, Jen DeSena, she's a bit of, a political unknown to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
She seems to be, a nonprofit kind of
Yes.
board chair. We spoke with her and Wink before the election,
Mm-hmm.
and, she kind of comes from like civic associations and stuff like
Right.
that. So is that kind of a bit of a wild card? Like, do people kind of know what to expect in terms of, I guess her role at the supervisor's position, or I guess we're all going to have to see?
Yeah, we're going to have to see. Yeah, I know she'd been, worked for substance abuse coalition in Manhasset. So, yeah, we've quoted her before, I believe, on, marijuana regulations. So, yeah, she's very active in the community, and she probably was a smart pick by the Republicans. So we'll see what, she'll have a Democratic town board. So there could be some fireworks there along the lines of when Laura Gillen was the Democratic supervisor in basically almost an all Republican town board.
Yeah, no, so that definitely is something that we got to keep an eye on. I know it's just across the border, but one of the open seats for one of the town supervisors in Huntington, I believe, where Chad Lupinacci had decided not to seek re-election, that seems to have gone to another Republican, I believe Ed Smith, who beat the former deputy executive, I believe Rebecca Sanin. So Ed Smith, it seems like he's also an internal kind of hire in a sense, where he was, I believe, the deputy supervisor. Is that correct? He's also from.
That's my understanding. Yeah, he got the Republican line. Chad Lupinacci had some scandals and lawsuits, so he also ran for state senate last year. So he'd been his signs have been around for a long time in the Huntington area.
Okay, so yeah, that seems like another one that, like I said, kind of is a part of that red wave, and where, despite whatever the potential scandals and kind of noise was around the previous, I guess supervisor, they seem to hold on to that seat. And you did mention briefly that Nassau County Comptrollers race, where it was basically a battle of former state senate candidates. Elaine Phillips wound up beating she's the Republican who beat Ryan Cronin.
Sure.
Sizably by about that 20% margin looked like too. So, what I guess maybe can we expect in terms of the role of that office changing? I guess focusing more maybe not on some of the things that Schnurman was in terms of like the social infrastructure and other things, maybe more towards fiscal conservatism, or, what do you think that'll wind up playing out as?
I mean, that office has to do audits and reports and make sure payroll goes out. And I mean, Schnurman had a lot of reports on social equity, and he did veer off into different territory. Elaine Phillips has been asked to look at the reassessment. So that was one of the first things Bruce Blakeman tapped her to do. So we'll see if that's a lane she'll take and where that office will go. But yeah, she lost 2 years ago to Anna Kaplan, and now she's back.
Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case there. So I guess, maybe in that sense, going back to what we talked about a little bit, the party chairs and the party's response, specifically, I guess, Joe Cairo over here in Nassau County, is, I guess they, obviously kind of, beating themselves or patting themselves on the back for the big wins. But what made it seem like they were so much better kind of this time around than the other times, maybe some of these candidates who had run before, if anything?
I spoke to Joe Cairo about Elaine Phillips months ago when she put her, when he announced her as a candidate, and he said he makes sure everyone is the right fit for every position. They call him the coach, and he uses a lot of sports metaphors. So they believed that she was the right fit. She has a finance background, and especially with a lot of the chatter about Jack Schnurman with him taking the payout that was more than it was supposed to be calculated at. He tapped into, he believed she was the right candidate. And I know she was considered for county executive. There was chatter about that, but he said this is the right fit for her with her financial background. So that she has a lot of credentials.
Yeah, and I guess
banking committee in the Senate. So that was kind of a natural fit. Joe Cairo believed.
Yeah, but I guess I imagine somewhat similar beliefs in terms of Blakeman and all these other candidates, like you said, who maybe swung and missed the first times around, but now seem to be again having won and are victorious. Just maybe the last question here, Scott. I know you have to run. In terms of what we're going to look forward to for not even the state elections, which is a whole other can of worms, but this governor's race. Obviously there's Lee Zeldin from out in Long Island and Suffolk County. There's a couple of Democrats, who are going to run against the Governor Hochul, who says she's obviously continuing, going to campaign for this office going forward. So just maybe big takeaways in terms of how this may impact both campaign strategy and even kind of legislative policy, in the next kind of upcoming cycle here.
It's a really interesting. We're going to have to see if the campaigns next year can get Democrats to come out, because will this be a wake up call for Democrats? There was complete lethargy this time around. So it's really important for the Democrats to find out why they didn't show up, how to get them out. I mean, now, a lot of the Democratic bases in New York City, but, some of the Republican candidates can tap into anxiety in the suburbs. So that's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And of course, the midterms, Republicans probably feel good about that because those are in discrete congressional districts, and they're going to have to, look at what happened with the counties this year. Statewide, Democrats have a larger advantage than in these districts, but Democrats really have to focus on turnout.
Yeah, definitely. And we already see Congressman Tom Suozzi, trying to position himself in this battle between, the moderate lane, we'll call it, and the progressive kind of wing of the party. And it's certainly going to, I think, be a lot more fireworks, and we're going to see what ultimately makes the difference, if anything, or if Republicans just really have managed to campaign well. And kind of just make the difference out here and hold their margins going forward. But go ahead, Bill.
No, I always see all right, so this time it's Republicans, next time it'll be Democrats, and then the time after that it'll be Republicans, because nobody's really happy with either party. And once they get in, they made all their promises, and then they failed to meet the promise, and okay, I'm going to vote for the other guy. When it's really the system that needs changing. We're still playing the game.
Pendulum swings,
like
you said. But you see even ballot measures, which could have had some difference on electoral reforms, that they didn't pass.
Yeah,
so, like I said, there are other ways. There were some other initiatives in some towns, regarding marijuana and other kind of more localized issues. But certainly this is, electoral representative democracy. Yeah. So we kind of, you do what we can, but that's why we encourage everyone to vote, because regardless of who you obviously vote for, it's important to try to make your voice heard and, impact the policy that impacts all of our lives. So thank you as always, Scott.
Thank you very much, Scott. I know you're, and
appreciate your time.
We're going to stay in touch because there's still some races that haven't been called yet, right?
Sure. Yeah. Anytime.
I'll keep my fingers
crossed.
More.
Yep. Politics never ends. Always on to the next cycle. So take care.
Of course.
But
enjoy.
We'll be working hard next week. We'll talk to you.
Exactly. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Take care. Be well. Thanks again.
I mean, New York City is, that's interesting. I'm just really finding out that this guy actually was, very involved in, but I never heard of him rising to the top, or that could be good for New York City.
Seeing again how, across the state, races, even across the state line in New Jersey, wound up being very close with Phil Murphy, who, pollsters thought would have kind of a little bit more had the easier kind of margins. That wasn't the case there either.
Yeah.
I believe in Westchester, people point to a race in Buffalo between somebody who was a socialist candidate versus somebody who was the Democrat who lost in the primary, but wound up winning the general election as a write-in candidate. Right. So I don't know if you've been following that one.
That was wild, yeah.
That was an interesting one. I'll just say the one little tidbit that really caught me by surprise was, I guess, the fact that they're legally allowed, I don't know if it's just in that county or if it's across the state, for a write-in campaign to give out stamps to voters. So people were literally just stamping the guy's name.
Really?
Exactly, yeah. Just stamping the name onto their ballots, and that's totally legal. So that's some of those like old-timey things that you don't really kind of consider, I guess, but are somewhere in the, corners of the election law kind of, indexes and encyclopedias. But that was a bit kind of surprising to think, what would happen if, imagine, on a national level, that was what had happened in a race.
Did the results on the propositions surprise you?
To be honest, not given the outcomes of the actual races, seeing how much Republicans had margins in most of these races. No, unfortunately, regardless of what people's perspectives are on individually each one of them, the reform package of 1, 3, and 4, which would have kind of number one was the most complicated and probably the most controversial, which allowed redistricting to be kind of tweaked in terms of a number of different modifications. The second ballot initiative wasn't that controversial.
No, it's pretty. I would have thought that already existed. I mean, that sounds like a human right. That doesn't sound like something.
That's one of those things, Bill, where you would think you might assume, but then when you realize that the U.S. hasn't actually signed on to the UN Declaration of Human Rights in terms of, I believe, water being a kind of necessary, human right, it kind of makes sense why states have to pass their individual laws.
Well, you also have companies like Nestle who are out there absconding with water supplies so that they can put it in bottles and sell it back to us.
Yeah, no, we've discussed that, and we can discuss in a minute what happened with the water system, LI American Water out here. There was that law got passed, and it seems like it's going to wind up, leading to the municipal takeover in some extent by the county, which will be interesting under Republican control of the water authority over there. Knowing how many headaches and crazy stories we've heard and talked to Mark Harrington and other folks about over obviously at Newsday. That's its own element, but some said, it's going to open up to lots of litigation and, it's obviously a bit vague, but for the most part, I think that was, the relatively non-controversial bipartisan one that passed, ballot proposal 2, establishing that constitutional right to clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment. Number 3 was the, option to pass a law for same-day voter registration.
Right.
That wasn't approved. I believe, about 10 to 20 states have that already. This is something that could cut both ways for Republicans and Democrats. But Republicans ran, and the Conservative Party spent a lot of money, it seems, specifically against Proposition 1, Proposition 3, and Proposition 4, which authorized or would have authorized the legislature to pass a law for no excuse absentee voting, which is what we currently have given the pandemic, which was just that you fill out the box, you say, actually you wouldn't need to fill out the box. You wouldn't need to say that I'm afraid of, sickness, I'm afraid of a pandemic or anything. You would just say, I want to vote absentee. Now the standard was, you need to either be out of the area or you need to be, physically unable. In service, things like that. To get it, so I know 20 states or so have that already passed. And again, you would think that this would help Republicans and Democrats, but I think Republicans, knew that if something like that passed, and if it did get, Democrats further registration, further enrollment in their party, then that would, maybe seal their faith going forward. There
only seems to be two ways to go. You're either for stifling the ability to vote or creating more opportunities to make it happen. Those are the two ends of the stick. Right?
I've heard, folks put it that simply, and I know a lot of folks who are saying that, well, this wouldn't even be really a point of contention if things like the John Lewis, Voting Rights Act would pass at the federal level. Then basically these would all be codified, across all 50 states.
Right.
So that's something, that I think seriously was important. And I think most people didn't know about these ballot initiatives at best till, a couple of days before, maybe a week or two, more likely when they got into the poll and, flipped it over and stuff like that. But the point was that definitely, I think as the both party chairmen, had said, they attribute both the positive and the negative, to some extent of all these results in individual races to their campaign or the lack of a campaign to really mount strong kind of arguments on these ballot measures. So I don't know. It's certainly something, I guess, that didn't surprise me to answer your question in a long way as we go over this individual ballot measures that were there.
Yeah, well, I pretty well figured the first one was a no-go since gerrymandering is a big way to help yourself to political office.
Oh, of course. And again, it makes sense why the...
To me, that's, I mean, if you've ever seen some of the gerrymandering maps that they have.
Oh, yeah.
It's mind-blowing. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. And to me, it's like it's borderline crookery. I mean, you're right on the line there. That's, I always felt that people in government should be on the side of doing things to try to help people live more easily. Not to confuse the issue, and that's the...
Yeah. It's certainly seen as gamesmanship. I know we talked to Congressmember Swazi, a while back, and he was saying, specifically that people like him who are the moderates, at least in his eyes, the fact that when you have these districts that do kind of cater to your bases, it winds up, again, kind of creating, in a sense, predetermined outcomes, where, like I said, that, you're going to be pushed into... And you see at the national level too, with these Congress people in races where, for people maybe up in the north in New York City or New York State and Long Island, they say, well, how does that person keep winning their seat, over in West Virginia or somewhere like that? But you look at the district.
Mitch McConnell comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a number of them. Like I said, and they would say the same thing about how these people keep winning their seats in parts of Long Island or the city. But no, certainly I think, there's a bigger picture along with this kind of, individual battle between the parties, on this election night, recent.
It's a little depressing, though, to think that, like an assemblyman, you look at the vote tallies, and we're talking about, 4,000 people in some cases. And that's certainly not representative of any district, I don't think.
Well, that's exactly what I think the core of the issue is here. And that's why, some people who were pushing for things like same-day voter registration or, absentee no excuse ballots to make it more accessible, to make more people part of the voting pie, you would think in theory would be good.
Right.
But like I said,
when it delivers the results you're looking for, of course it's going to be something
versus when it doesn't. And just to close, maybe that part of the discussion in terms of saying that, gerrymandering is a thing that cuts both ways, and it's a luxury of being in power, basically, at the time that the censuses are, kind of decided. And the fact is that, the Democrats were trying to do this, and they didn't succeed, and would have further codified their power going forward. It still was going to wind up probably having to that effect to an extent, since they do still control the state houses. But the fact is that the Republicans and others, knew that this was something that they couldn't, allow to happen because it might lead to their further extinction, basically.
We're going to see. We're going to see what's going to happen. But we've told our listening audience this more times, and we'll probably keep hammering it because I think it's an important point. Local politics is important. It affects everybody, and it's going to affect you more directly probably than. The sad thing is we all see the national politics, and we all, so that's where the conversation goes. But if you walk out into the street and ask people a simple question, like, who's your state senator? They don't know. Who's your assemblyman? They don't know. Who's your legislator? They don't know.
Yeah. And how much money did they bring back for the school district?
And I'm not pointing a finger at those people because I was one of those people. I mean, I walked out there too and went, oh my goodness, tomorrow's election day. And, you picked up your Newsday and you went through and you saw a couple of names. You said, okay, I'll recognize somebody. And if you had the impetus to actually go and vote, you did it with not a lot of information.
Yeah, especially on those ballot measures, like I said. But all those down ballot races, usually people, they catch the first one or two, but I think
the biggest thing that people miss is that people have the power, but they only have it in numbers. You can't expect all your neighbors to go vote and you don't, and get the outcome you want.
The people want the latent benefit.
It's with us. We have
it,
but we're not using it. We don't use it.
It's all about collective bargaining, representative democracy, basically, and the more people who are part of the collective.
And I have heard company CEOs, they probably wouldn't say this at a company meeting, but I've heard them quoted as saying that, if people ever realized how much power they actually have and they could get together and unify it, And they also said that the labor movement in the United States is only going to benefit its membership if it does the collective bargaining is the only way. Because as individuals, you got no shot. You just
what's interesting, Bill, is maybe just kind of seeing it again, big picture in terms of what we're talking about now in these elections, is that there was a big push for strikes for a number of national companies over the last basically month, and they were referred to it on social media as Striketober, where companies like Kellogg's, companies like major players in a lot of different fields, especially in the food services, they wound up seeing basically the calls for strike, a lot of people obviously picketing and trying to really push for better kind of wages or better benefits. John Deere, that company, a lot of other companies, there were these kind of incidents of folks who were hired, sometimes derogatorily, known as like scabs, coming in, or they would hire and move people around where they were the office staff and now they were moving forklifts, and then you would see incidents of the forklift flipped over, and people who weren't trained to do that were having issues and stuff like that, understandably. But the point is that despite all that, and despite again IATSE and these other unions trying to make inroads and get public support, a lot of these races countrywide and statewide tended Republican, which is interesting. I think considering that those were seen as okay, well, maybe is there some momentum coming back to organized labor and to maybe to the left in a sense.
It's the only way labor. Well, I've heard the story. The story changed. Companies are saying we can't find workers, and so then of course you hear people scream, "Well, all these lazy people." And now the other side of that story is beginning to become louder, that a worker's not going to work 72 hours for you for a paycheck of $800. Not going to work.
Well, that's the thing. It's not going to work for either party.
The companies that are realizing that aren't having a problem getting workers. But there's a big change, I think, in the labor force. People are beginning to realize that they don't want to be a paycheck to paycheck slave. And in most of these positions, that's the only choice you have. You work every day, and it's
to get by, not to
not
live
to
high on a hog.
So I don't know. Push is going to come to shove, but I think people do really have to realize you have the power. We empower a government to work for us. You don't work for them. They work for you.
That's definitely true. And it's something that I think the more people are reminded in terms of the legislators, if they're reminded by the folks, when they come out on policy issues and they tell them, hey, this is something that we care about. Why aren't you doing something about it? Or we don't like what you're doing. You see that is the applied pressure that's necessary to have really any type of change or progress be made. Otherwise, it's easy to just listen to the people who are close to you, potentially donors and lobbyists who say, well, we can just, help you with this. We have plenty of expertise in the area. And if you don't hear the other side, again, both, conservative ideology, obviously progressive ideologies, we want people who consider all the sides and, hopefully,
I would like to see elections funded by the public and, X amount of dollars. That's it. One guy can't spend $500 million and, on TV ads. And I mean, that stuff's really got to go. The system,
on a mildly funny note, Bill, to your point, I don't know, I didn't see all the details, but I saw a story about a New Jersey candidate for their state Senate. He's a Raymore, I think, in Flanagan, or some kind of like furniture company truck driver, who allegedly unseated the most long tenured and the Senate speaker, by only raising $158 allegedly, and that was the ultimate knee slapper. Exactly.
How disgruntled does an electorate have to be to do that?
That is not a good sign of your political future if that's what happened in the place that they know you best. But Definitely, I figured that one to get you a chuckle, and I think after all of the kind of results we're seeing here, and like I said, obviously Republicans are very optimistic going forward. Democrats not as much, but the whole key is that we're going to have to all work here together, one way or the other, and
it's
pretty much
here we are again. I mean that every election.
Yeah, like you said, the pendulum, the pendulum. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
but one of the other things I wanted to say is just to push some of the shows that are on after us. On Fridays, of course, we have Steve Mandrasine, and we got Tom and Heidi Ryan doing their show, How the Music Changed, on a Friday. Got a lot of good programming on WHPC.
Sports talk right after us, of course. Stay tuned for a recap.
If you're looking for a show on HPC, you can go online to ncc.edu and get the program guide, and it'll tell you when your favorite show. The thing about college, or this college radio, it's a community service, really. So you serve everybody in the community. And there are going to be some shows you might say, I don't want to listen to that. Well, fine, you might not. But go and find the one you do, because I will guarantee you there's a show on WHPC that will grab your interest. And Tom and Heidi Ryan show, that's
classical.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but Rob Leonard's Beatles show on Friday nights. He should have been syndicated a long time and played all over the country.
You're right.
Some of them are just really good. Steve Mandrasina, Anything and Everything, and that's a great description for his show, because it is anything and everything.
Exactly, and also we should remind listeners that they can obviously follow WHPC on all the social media accounts, all those platforms that you and your family are on. From Facebook or whatever they want to call themselves now, Meta, to obviously Twitter, Instagram, and probably the TikTok. We're too old for that, but some interns probably handling that well, better than any of us could. And then reminder that you can follow us too, obviously, at This Week's Long Island News, at TWLI News on Twitter, where we're most active. You can obviously still follow on Facebook and on Instagram as well.
And if you have a question that we didn't ask, maybe a candidate or whatever, you can also do WHPC at ncc.edu and just put This Week's Long Island News in the subject line and shoot us your question, because we don't think of everything. We know that. But
no, we'd appreciate it. The more we can crowdsource production, the happier I am. The earlier I can, make sure that everything's squared away with Bill and stuff like that. So more than happy. Like I said, we want to make this, we've always said, as kind of interactive and responsive to the community's, interest and needs as possible. That's what this is all about. I not to hear ourselves, but to kind of know. What are the issues out there, that Long Islanders can know more about, and hopefully, again, inform all of our decisions civically and otherwise.
Yep. So anyway.
So good stuff.
We'll see you next time. The clock on the wall says it's time for This Week's Long Island News to move on out of here. We do thank you for joining us. And again, remind you that you can catch This Week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock right here on 90.3 WHPC.